The Inverse Relationship of Space and Time. By Rick Delmonico. When Einstein talked about the curvature of spacetime, he was talking about the variation of scale in a region of space. Light takes the shortest, laziest path. The pressure created by denser time is the force we call gravity. The fractal nesting of the relationship between space and time at different scales causes phase transitions as the influence of one force changes with respect to another. From this we get the astonishing variety of behaviors in the material world. Everything is fields and the structure of reality is a computational geometry that is fractal in nature. Gravity is a geometry of motion in time. Time has a quality that must extend beyond one dimension and a fractal nesting of energy that increases as the scale becomes finer. The reason is levels of description. It is all information. Foundational principles. Nature is lazy, it likes to copy. Everything is information. Information is not stuff, it is relationships. All behaviors are constrained by relationships. All behaviors are emergent. Every engine takes advantage of a difference. Everything is an approximation of something else. Ratio may be the only thing that is discrete. Behavior is built up from a quantum of action in a field. The bending of space-time is a variation of scale. If dimensions are virtual in the same way that the dimensions of consciousness are virtual, then the density of information in a field will affect the scale or bending of space-time. Gravity and scale are related. Gravity and information are related. Information and scale are related. If it's relational, there's a geometry involved. Truth as a scale coordinate, truth lives in the macro world, the micro world is uncertain. Truth as a time coordinate, truth lives in the past, the future is uncertain. Information from the micro future is formed into a macro past. The process of formation involves entanglement. Coffee and cream, 1, separate, 2, complex, 3, homogeneous. Information appears to increase and then decrease, perhaps in a bell-shaped curve. If the sun makes a gravitational bowl shape in the fabric of space, this bowl shape travels with the sun through space. The bowl appears motionless in relationship to the Earth, so the Earth rolls around this bowl according to the inclination of the bowl and the speed of the Earth. The question becomes, what is the bowl shape in relationship to the sun moving through space? As the sun moves faster, would the bowl become more asymmetrical? Would the sun be trying to climb the bowl it is creating? If the sun occupies a position on the slope of this bowl in the direction of travel, then this would act to slow down the speed of the sun in relationship to the rest of the universe, and any acceleration by any mass would be a repositioning to some degree on the slope of the bowl. Why is acceleration the same as gravity? This must be something like a pressure gradient in the relationship between space and time. Time is the most dense when the influence of acceleration and gravity are zero. As space is bent, time is unbent. If time and space are inversely proportional, then we are not talking about a four-dimensional continuum. Time has a quality that cannot be described by the block universe model. According to Einstein, if you accelerate a clock to the speed of light, its mass becomes infinite and its time stops. A clock behind me stops when I accelerate to light speed, but this says nothing about its mass. If I were a photon, does the electron that will eventually absorb me become infinitely massive? If this is the case, then the photon can't miss an infinitely massive object. Gravity is a particular geometry of motion, and so is a particle. The most fundamental thing is information, it cannot be otherwise. This geometry is more about relationships and less about stuff. This stuff is made from the relationships. The clock behind me goes from normal flow to stopped when I go from stop to the speed of light in relationship to the clock. The clock in front of me, 4 light years away, goes from normal flow to 4 years into the future when I go from stop to the speed of light and stop again at the clock. Let the acceleration be instantaneous. All of time is curled up and is uncurled by acceleration and gravity. Mass is condensed energy. If I could see the clock in front of me, it would show the time from 4 years ago, so the jump to light speed and stopped again is an 8-year difference. If a photon in motion has something like mass, the mass has to go somewhere for a photon at rest. This is because everything is fields made of waves. Only ratio is discrete. The idea here is that an electron is a combination of its own energy state and the energy state of a photon of a particular frequency, depending on the shell it inhabits. At no time in the photon's history was it a particle. The question would be, where does the photon go, or where does its energy go? Does the photon disappear from existence? A clock positioned halfway, 2 light years, shows the time 2 years ago at the start and 2 years into the future at the end, a 4-year jump. As soon as you pass the clock, positioned halfway, it stops, but you will not see this because your trip occurs in an instant of time. Gravity unbends time, and there is no place you can be that does not have some gravity because of the mass of your body. The distant clock as viewed from our position is too small to detect, but becomes normal sized as soon as we take off at the speed of light because we arrive in the same instant. Scale and resolution become important. As the universe expands, the material in it becomes thinner and time curls back up. If a photon from the early universe comes to a stop after 5 billion years, the deceleration uncurls 5 billion years of time. If it continues until now, the deceleration uncurls about 14 billion years of time. The difference is the size of space. Scale may not be discrete but relative. All behaviors occur in ratios, including emergent behaviors. Once you decelerate in relationship to the clocks, their rate of time becomes normal again. Galaxies spin the way they do because time is curled up, compressed, more at the outer edge. In the beginning the universe, space-time was poised at the edge of criticality, space was at maximum compression and time was at maximum expansion. At the center of galaxies time is the least curled up, and curls back up as the mass becomes thinner at the outer edge. A little less curvature in space will curl up time more than our present equations describe. This has something to do with scale and resolution. The more time uncurls, the larger the space that is created. The difference between time being the most dense and the least dense is the size of space. It is motion, this includes spin. The scale of space is directly linked to time and motion. The thing that is the most constant is ratios. Variation at the cosmic scale has large regions of homogeneity or voids. At the scale of galaxies there is more fluctuation and many more nested hierarchies within the region of the galaxies. As we continue to finer scales, the nesting of variation becomes denser and denser. The denser the region, the deeper the levels of description. In other words, how much information is needed to describe a particular region of space/time. The ratio of the homogeneous regions to the regions with lots of variation is very high, like the ratio of matter to empty space. This is a fractal nesting of information. It is not the digital horizon that prevents Zeno's paradox, it is the dithering of self-referential noise. Quantization and time, light is separated by discrete frequencies. These frequencies are related to time in a different way than its speed passing a certain point in space and includes variation past a certain point in time. I would suspect that time is behaving differently with these different frequencies. This is a relationship of precise ratios, something like harmonic nesting. Einstein believed that space was smooth and continuous. This quantization is one of relationships and space/time is more like a fractal nesting of harmonic and inharmonic ratios. The phase transitions of matter always occur at the boundary of chaos or edge of criticality. Time may have more dimensions than we thought. Time has more than one relationship to light and the ultraviolet catastrophe is prevented by something like a fractal scaling law. Space and time are emergent. Mass is a standing wave in space/time but standing in relationship to what? Mass is also information and it is the relationships in a particular context that gives the information meaning or structure. The dynamics of dimensions will yield surprising clues. Scale is not static and dimensions are not static. A quantum of action in a field. Dimensions are a transcendent property of space-time. Can we test whether space is grainy or smooth? I think it is possible using the mass of a large object and moving a much less massive object closer until the larger mass is able to be moved by the smaller mass. If space is grainy, this would occur when the larger mass can move at least one Planck length in one Planck unit of time. The macro world is smooth, the micro world is grainy and never the twain shall meet. When two bodies fall towards each other, resolution and scale may be important. Let's say a bowling ball is falling towards the Earth is also pulled by the mass of the bowling ball, but until the Earth can move at least one Planck length in one unit of Planck time, the Earth will not be moved. The mass of the bowling ball would have to be increased until the mass reaches a particular level to bridge the quantized steps that would allow the Earth to move one Planck length. This reminds me of the photon's discrete steps. No particular symmetry can exist at all scales because of the Fredkin paradox. Action in the finer scales of a system will always nudge a decision, dithering, in unpredictable ways at the edge of chaos. All of the interesting stuff is happening at the boundary between order and chaos. Combinatorics and networks is the idea that a relatively small group of interacting agents can recombine in a surprisingly large number of ways. Space is not an empty stage and it is not an ether, it is more like a nested hierarchy of action. The discrete bits are precise ratios of a quantum of action. Dimensions don't exist before action and not all dimensions are equal. This must be some kind of decision engine generating novelty, with the fuel being something like the difference between harmonic regularity and self-referential noise. Every engine takes advantage of a difference and we may not be able to name this difference. The Big Bang could be a large-scale phase transition in state space. Each step in the process has some range of choices, and when the choice becomes too fine-grained, criticality at the edge of chaos, it is the chaos that drives the choice one way or the other. This is a random walk, the testing of state space, the measuring of value. All value is not equal and it is the network or range of associations that controls or decides what is valuable and what is not. The result is increasing levels of sophistication. The idea that value exists in state space and must be measured and located for some purpose suggests consciousness is behind all of this activity. Where does scale come from? Scale is nature repeating the same step over and over. Complexity increases over time. The more complexity, the more information. The idea of virtual dimensions is that action, in relation to its source, chooses a direction and depending on the action, creates the path it travels through. There is no empty stage that was there before the action. When a photon takes off in some particular direction, a two-dimensional virtual sheet is created for the wave to travel through. An interruption can create a one-dimensional time-like line perpendicular to the sheet, the collapse of the wave function, to occur. The motion is transferred from these various virtual dimensions in discrete or quantum-like ratios. All of the relationships are discrete but not necessarily the scale. The curvature of space and time are variations of scale. With entanglement, each particle creates one hemisphere of a growing sphere, two-dimensional sheet. The particle has spin, the entire sphere, virtual two-dimensional sheet, is spinning, and an interruption at one pole of the sphere instantly affects the other pole. January 29, 18. Because the event horizon stores all of the information within its volume, and the position of the event horizon is determined by gravity, there must be a correlation between gravity and information. The number of behaviors that can be contained in a region of space is proportional to the force of gravity in that region. When we talk about isolated event horizons, we are referring to a particular time scale. At the scale of galaxies, very long time scales are involved, and at the scale of atoms, time scales and isolation are very much shorter. Meaning has a dynamic, a thickness or density, as well as a network of connections and associations, so it will fluctuate from person to person, creating a range of expressions as it spills into the landscape. The density of the connectedness can increase until the probability space collapses into a region with an event horizon, at which point the region is at maximum compression and the information about the region is stored as a two-dimensional hologram. This phase transition causes the influence to reduce in dimensions from 3 to 2. The information loses its dynamics and, in a sense, the meaning is lost. We are not talking about waves or particles. What we are talking about is a quantum of action in a field. This thing we call a particle is a quantum of action that becomes more focused by a process we have not described, and this thing we call a wave is the potential in the field. How can a wave be quantized? The wave is a precise ratio of potential. Creating an answer from axioms or rules of the game, Achilles can never overtake the tortoise because of infinite regress, or Achilles will always overtake the tortoise given enough time, because Achilles will always cover more distance than the tortoise in the same unit of time. If we describe time in terms of information, it would be the rate of change. If we describe space in terms of information, it would be these regions where the relationship of a difference between two or more things live. In a network, the dimensions are not discrete, and there is no way to determine the number of dimensions involved in complex systems. The rest mass of a photon is only zero in relationship to a measurement, and the measurement is more real than the photon. The photon in the relationship between space and time, like everything else, and what is waving is the relationship. What is the lifetime of a photon? It depends on which clock you use, and the answer can range between 0 and infinity. If the clock is the photon itself, it is 0, and if the clock is at the exact center of the universe, it is infinity. Mass can be anywhere from 0 to infinity for an electron depending on the observer. For a photon that will be absorbed by an electron, the electron has infinite mass, and the mass of the electron that emitted the photon can no longer be measured in relationship to the moving photon. The question of exactly what a measurement is, has not been settled. It is possible that the measurement is more real than the thing being measured. Sean Carroll has stated that there is no such thing as a particle, so has Neil Turok. What is waving? Probability. The relationship between space and time. Something else. We are measuring waves with a contraption that is made out of waves. Everything is approximations, and the only thing that could be discrete is ratios. The bending of space/time is a variation of scale. If we think of space as a dodecahedron fractal, any action on the faces has a vector depending on the distance to the edges or vertices. Would this violate the Lorentz invariance? Since all locations on the face are not equal in terms of the distance to the edges or vertices. Fractal violations of the Lorentz invariance. Time is fractal in the same way that the measurement of the coastline of England is fractal. Time can loop in different durations at different scales, but because of levels of complexity, the idea that macro objects are time reversible is flawed. Also, Feynman's path integrals are not infinite, they're fractal as well. You can't make a difference in an echo chamber. How do we get structure from a probability cloud? What is the engine of reality? Objects in our dimensions of space-time are like projections or shadows from higher dimensional objects. All forces are multidimensional vibrations. The geometry of dimensions will become important going forward. In a hologram, what is the location of the information? Conformal cyclic cosmology, maximum radiation to matter becomes maximum matter to radiation as a cycle. The entropy of radiation and the entropy of matter/gravity are inversely proportional. A relationship wave. Scale is lost at some point in the cycle. Roger Penrose. If every point in the volume of a sphere is plotted on the surface of the sphere as an interference pattern of wavelets, the surface is a hologram of the interior. The point at the center of the sphere is the lowest or fundamental frequency. All points inside the sphere are expressed on the surface as vibrations. Waves are not discrete like the idea of quantum particles, the relationships are discrete. These vibrations exist because the universe, like life, exists in a stream of energy. Each of the four forces are associated with a particular scale in relationship to the whole. As we move through scale, the relationship of one force changes with respect to another. It is possible that everything is built up from the inverse relationship between space and time. You can think of empty space as a region where time has more pressure. Scale becomes important and dimensions are not discrete. In fact, objects and their dimensions could be virtual shadows of higher dimensional objects. Everything is fields generating forms from vibrations at different energy levels and scales. Anything, like a proton, with the property of continuity has harmonic regularity. It has a harmonic relationship to the stream of energy like a musical note vibrating inside a flute. Information is a difference that can make a difference, truth is information that doesn't change, and self-referential noise is a difference that doesn't make a difference. No matter how much information we use to describe a tree, it will always be incomplete. The only complete description of the tree is the tree itself, within the context of its environment and its existence in time. These levels of description are a fractal. The only place self-referential noise makes a difference is at the knife's edge between subcritical and supercritical boundary conditions in a system, dithering, Buridan's donkey. Can dimensions undergo a phase transition? The more sensors in the environment, the more awareness. Awareness, self-organizes. Everything is fields generating forms and the information is stored as relationships. Music transcends the mathematical relationships it is constructed from. Music contains many levels of meaning. The meaning transcends the music. There is no model using linear dynamics that will explain how life appeared or how the universe was wound up. I am not impressed with the explanations thus far. All creatures are tuned to value no matter what the truth happens to be. String theory has 10 to the power of 500 possible solutions. This does not appear to be an explanation. Infinity in theoretical physics comes from the description of waves. Does a wave have an infinite number of points? Relative to itself, yes. Relative to anything else, no. Relationships are fractal computations. Waves exist in many dimensions and scales. The hollow movement is not static and the information is not perfectly distributed. Space and time are built up from entanglement. Consciousness is also entangled. The fractal nesting of event horizons. The volume of time in a particular region of space creates the pressure that we think of as gravity. The region of space with more mass has less pressure. Everything in a region of space that has lots of mass is smaller because the dimensions of space are compactified. Clocks behave differently depending on the region of space they inhabit. There is an inverse relationship between space and time. At the speed of light, the three dimensions we are familiar with don't exist. Likewise, inside the event horizon of a black hole, space is falling towards the singularity faster than light and the dimensions are different. The singularity is a region of space where the description of the dimensions has not been described properly. You have state space, which is layers of iteration, like an onion growing in n dimensions. Then you have material expression branching out like a tree into state space. A photon is not a thing, it is a description of a relationship. Law relies on constraints. No constraints, no law. No law, no emergence. Time is fractal in the same way that the measurement of the coastline of England is fractal. Time can loop in different durations at different scales, but because of levels of complexity the idea that macro objects are time reversible is flawed. Science has not come up with a method to solve the question of where all of the energy driving the dynamics of the universe came from. The current idea would be to say that nothing is unstable. For me, this is not sufficient. Nothing is a lack of variation at every scale. An electron is a combination of its own energy state and the energy state of a photon of a particular frequency, depending on the shell it inhabits. At no time in the photon's history was it a particle. The idea that the space-time a photon experiences is the same for the electron is probably wrong. Dimensions and scale are not discrete in the same way that ratio is discrete. A particle can be thought of as a highly localized vibration, a standing wave simulating a particle. The medium of the wave could be the inverse relationship of space and time, a variation of scale. The fractal nesting of event horizons. String theory continues the narrative that the universe is made of stuff. These vibrations are not stuff, they are relationships. The structure of reality is a computational geometry that is fractal in nature. Life is complex beyond description. With life, information structures must generate value, through novelty, without destroying themselves. Is evolution a theory or a law? The distinction between science and philosophy is blurred. You cannot claim the high ground of empirical science and then push a philosophical hypothesis. To summarize, evolution is the idea that accidents create structure and may the best accident win. Emergence is the idea that nature has discovered laws that we don't know about yet because we haven't found them, and there could be a very large number. All of life exists in a stream of energy. Science cannot tell you where this energy came from. Their best guess, nothing is unstable. There are many unanswered questions in physics, more than you might realize. Russell's residue, philosophical problems with solutions become science. Perception divides the hollow movement, differentiates, and shapes experience, which is a combination of perception and expectation that is filtered through a map which is embodied in the structure of the creature. From this experience comes expression, reiterations. Good explanations should be simple and elegant. If we think of the universe as a closed system, then the fine-tuning problem is a really big problem. If we think of the universe as an open system, then the fine-tuning problem goes away, because the universe is behaving like a living system, extracting order from a stream of energy.